Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor, and today I'm going to be in conversation with none other than Thomas Piketty. He's the world-renowned economist, a leading voice on the discourse on inequality and inclusion. He's a professor at the Paris School of Economics, where he set up the World Inequality Lab as well as the World Inequality Database. Thank you so much, Professor Piketty, for joining us. So now, Professor Piketty, I know that you're very busy, you have a lot of meetings, so I'm just going to dive right into it. You have spoken, you've been a vocal proponent of a wealth tax, and in India especially, where you say that the inequality has been widening, it's been rising quite sharply over the last few decades. But then, especially in a panel discussion yesterday, government economists, the chief economic advisor and the member of the PMEAC, they argued that a wealth tax would drive a lot of India's rich out of the country, or it would increase evasion, tax evasion here, something that we have a history of. In the 70s, when the tax rates were very high, there was also a very high level of evasion. So, how do you reconcile these two?
Well, I think the situation is very different from the 70s. Well, first, we can learn from some mistakes and do better. And most importantly, the level of billionaire wealth that has been accumulated in India over the past 20 years, and especially over the past 10 years, is completely unheard of. And, we all know, some names of very wealthy billionaires. But if you look collectively, at the top few hundred or few thousand Indians, they have the capacity to contribute more to Indian public finances. And, I think I would like, the government of India and government economists, to release how much income tax has been paid by the top 100 wealthiest Indian over the past 10 years. And I think the answer is very little. And given that this wealth has been accumulated by using the Indian public infrastructure, the Indian legal system, the Indian education system, health system, you have to contribute to this. And the Indian government has the capability to say, look, this has been accumulated in India. You want to go and live in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, please do it. But in the meantime, the assets are based in India. This has been accumulated in India, and so you will have to pay this tax no matter what, as a function of the number of years of residence that you've been in this country. And if you don't pay, then you are subject to the same the same penalties than anyone else not paying tax. So, if you have assets in India, they can be taken away from you. If you arrive at the Delhi airport without paying your tax, probably you will have to answer questions to policemen. The rest of the country is paying tax, and it's going to be very difficult to convince, middle class or upper middle class Indians who are not so rich by international standards to pay more tax if you don't start by asking, to the top billionaires their fair share. If we put the bigger issue in perspective, India is a country where total tax revenue are 13 to 14% of GDP. The international experience is that it's very difficult to pay for everything, for all public services, infrastructure, education, health, pension, etc., with so little money. So it will take a long time. It will probably, in the long term, the fraction of the population paying income tax will have to increase from 10% to 20%, 30% as income grow. But this will take a very long time, and this will be acceptable for Indian middle class and Indian taxpayer only if they can be guaranteed that the law also applies at the very top. So, I think the attitude of the government on this is a little bit self-defeating, because if you are very nihilistic and pessimistic about the possibility to make the law apply to people at the very top, how can you convince the rest of the country to take them together, in your long-term plan?
Right, I understand. But over the last few decades as well, this extreme increase in the billionaires' wealth, a lot of it has had to do with market capitalization, the stocks that they hold in their companies and the rise in this stock price, or it has to do with an entrepreneurial spirit where they've invested in these companies, they've tried to create wealth and all of that. Do you feel a wealth tax One, if you're taxing wealth based on the stock market, that might be unfair. And two, that if it's a tax on the entrepreneurial spirit, it might kill that spirit.
But you have lots of entrepreneurs in India with a lot of entrepreneurial spirit who are not billionaire. The rest of the country is working hard as well. The idea is that there's only a few hundred people who are working very hard in India and who are bringing economic growth for the rest of the country, who is just following their great leaders in economic entrepreneurship. I think is a view of the economic system that is not accurate. We live in an economy where you have millions and dozens of millions of small entrepreneurs and wage earners and managers and technicians and workers of all levels of skills, who are contributing to growth. And then, you need to make everybody contribute, at least in proportion to their income and wealth and in proportion to the increase in their income and wealth. And this is not what we're seeing today. So, I think at some point you have to look at the numbers, which are really impressive. And we are not talking of small entrepreneur making just a little wealth accumulation. Here we really have at the top a billionaire wealth which is getting completely out of control, and which also has, as we know, consequences for the functioning of the political systems, the media systems. I think for the general well-functioning of our democratic institution, it is not good to have excessive concentration of wealth.
Right. And you've talked about that eventually our tax base is going to grow. But, and you have talked about, of course, a tax on the billionaires. But what about a tax, say, I mean, should something like that also apply to farmers, say? Because the marginal farmers anyway, the small and marginal farmers anyway will be out of the tax net because our slabs are set in such a way. But should, say, a 2% tax or something like that, whatever you recommend for the rich, should that also apply to the farmers right now who are not paying any tax?
It depends which farmer we are talking about. If you're talking of very large farmers, it's a very different question from small farmers. So we have to look what we are talking about and what's the size of the properties, the size of the income, the size of the profits. Generally speaking, it's of course better to try to treat the different sectors alike. That being said, in practice, most of the farmers, will be below taxable level
Absolutely.
in India. Yeah.
Right. So the ones that are in the taxable net, you feel that they can potentially be taxed, even if it's a lower rate than income tax.
Yeah, I think at this stage, what's really important, because before you ask any additional tax to anybody with a sort of normal income, is that you need to ask people with extra normal income and wealth to pay more, because otherwise you will not convince anyone that this is fair. I think everybody has in mind the kind of enormous wealth that has been accumulated, sometimes with very close connections to the government, and this has to be repaired.
Okay, and over the last few years, the data shows that there's been a trend of corporate tax forming a smaller and smaller share in our total tax revenue, and income tax has now overtaken it and is forming a larger and larger share in our total tax revenue. So, in 2019, the government cut the corporate tax rates. Do you feel that this is a decision that should ideally be reversed? And if so, then what about the impact this might have on investment intentions and sentiment in India?
I think we should not reduce the corporate tax rate too much. I think this is, I know that this is partly because of international tax competition, but first, this is not a reason to go so far, and I think the Indian government has gone too far. And in any case, I think it's very important on all these topics, either billionaire taxation, corporate taxation, for India to actively participate to international attempt, to cooperate in order to put an end to this race to the bottom that we see on the taxation of the biggest economic players. And I'm very disappointed in a way that, India is not playing a bigger role in this discussion. Because I think, India, if India had supported, for instance, the proposal by Brazil to have a global minimum tax on billionaire, and there could be similar initiative for corporate taxation, then I think, a coalition of India, Brazil, South Africa, other countries coming from the largest democracies of the global South, this would have a big impact. And in the end, ultimately, this could force countries in the global North to accept reform of the international tax system, and I think more broadly of the international economic system, financial system, so that it will benefit India a great deal. Because I think in the end, a global billionaire tax or a global corporate tax would be also a way not only for Indian government to tax Indian billionaire or Indian corporations, but also, in my view, to get part of the revenue from the taxation of global billionaire or global large corporation in general. Because don't forget that we live at a time where we are all talking about, climate reparation and, mitigation fund, adaptation fund. There was a recent COP meeting a few weeks ago. But as long as we don't have a financial instrument and a tax instrument to pay for this fund, this will be cheap talk. Countries from the north will make promise, will never deliver. So you need to have a tax instrument that is targeted, and at least part of the tax revenue coming from this tax must go directly to this adaptation fund, and in effect must go directly to countries, in proportion to their population, in proportion to their exposure to climate change, and of course on both grounds, India should receive a very substantial share. So I think, the government of India, by not playing its role in this international negotiation, asking for tax justice, maybe because they are worried about tax justice in India, but by not playing this card of global tax justice, in the end are harming India, because I think India could benefit a lot from having a more active Indian government in this international negotiation. And I believe a lot in that. I think it will happen eventually, either with this Indian government or some other Indian government, that there will be this kind of coalition that will be pushing for this transformation.
But how do you square this circle? Because as you say, the concentration of wealth has also political implications, the pressure that they can exert on governments. So how is this going to allow the government to make a move to tax the people with the concentration of wealth?
Well, because this has already happened in history. It's always been the case that, the wealthy are very powerful and try to defend themselves as much as they can. But it's also always been the case that, democratic forces can be stronger. How did Roosevelt tax at 90%, top billionaires and top income earners in the US? It was not voluntary on their side. It was a big political battle. How did the aristocrat end up paying tax in France after the French Revolution? This was not voluntary on their side. So, you have different political processes, including elections, which can work and which have worked in the past and which I think can work in the future.
Right. And now, coming to our political system, what's been happening over the last few years is that freebies or rampant subsidies have become a part of the political process, especially before elections, where a lot of promises are made that we're going to give this amount of money to this segment of the population, to women or the poor or the farmers. There are a lot of these promises made. Do you feel that this is a genuine part of welfare economics, or has it just become now bribing the voters just before elections?
I think we have to be very careful about our legislation on political finance, the way political parties are financed. Now, the fact that politicians can make a wrong promise to the voter, that's slightly different, and it's I would, it's part of the democratic system with all its imperfection. certainly the quality of the media system is very important, and I think the governance of the media, the rules of the media, should guarantee the independence of journalists, in particular from shareholders, we need to have a different governance for the media and also in other economic sectors as well, but that's particularly important in the media. So yes, the legal framework in which democracy is embedded is very important. Now, this will never prevent, some politicians from making, all sorts of promises. And at the end of the day, voters are adults, and I trust in electoral forces and democratic forces that can be, stronger than all other forces.
I see. But on that note, thank you so much for your time, Professor Piketty. This has been fascinating.
Thank you.